sound of a single sharp inhale, followed by a low, steady voice, as if speaking directly into a microphone in a quiet, soundproofed room. It wasn't the fall that broke me. It was the hand that pushed me. Dr. Julian Croft, my mentor, the man who'd called me the most promising forensic anthropologist of my generation, stood before the review board, his face a perfect mask of regret, and he utterly destroyed me. Gross incompetence, he'd said, his voice ringing with false sympathy. A tragic contamination of the entire Blackwood Barrow site. He held up photos of the mass grave, our life's work, now supposedly tainted by my procedural errors. My career, my name, my future, all of it turned to ash in under 5 minutes. But as he delivered the killing blow, I saw it. On the back of his hand, so faint it was almost a trick of the light, was a scratch, a sigil, a 3-pronged fork intersecting a broken circle. The exact same mark I'd been finding etched into the femurs and skulls of the centuries-old corpses we'd exhumed. And in that sickening, heart-stopping moment, I knew. He hadn't just framed me. He'd made a deal. My exile was swift and brutal. I was a pariah. My calls went unreturned, my emails unanswered. The academic world, once my home, had bolted its doors. The final nail in the coffin was my family. They staged what they called an intervention in my parents' sterile living room, the air thick with disappointment. "Eris, please," my mother begged, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "You're talking about curses, about warnings from the dead. This isn't you. You're a scientist." My father, a man who measured life in stock prices and property values, was less gentle. "You're a disgrace," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You threw away a brilliant career to chase ghosts in bone dust. You're becoming a laughingstock, and you're dragging our name down with you." They saw madness in my eyes. They weren't entirely wrong. I was obsessed, because I knew the truth wasn't in Croft's doctored reports. It was in the bones. I retreated into a world of shadow and obsession, renting a cramped, damp basement apartment that smelled of mildew and defeat. The walls were soon covered not with photos of friends or family, but with high-resolution images of the Blackwood bones, tibias, skulls, ribs, each one a page in a terrifying unread book. I called the markings osteoglyphs. The world called it delusional pareidolia. My family cut me off. Colleagues who once admired me now whispered about my psychotic break. I was alone, with nothing but the silent screams of the long dead. Days bled into nights. I barely ate. I slept only when I collapsed from exhaustion. My dreams filled with the chilling geometry of the symbols. They weren't random. They were a language, a syntax of suffering. I began to catalog them, cross-referencing patterns, noting their placement on the skeletons. A mark on the clavicle meant a warning, one on the cranium a prophecy, and the one on Croft's hand, the one I'd started seeing on my own skin in the darkest hours of the night, like a faint silvery scar, that was a claim, a mark of ownership. The curse wasn't just a story etched in bone. It was a parasitic entity, and it had been invited into our world. The deeper I went, the more the darkness pushed back. The whispers started first, faint sibilant sounds from the corners of the room, twisting my name into a threat. Then came the shadows, things that darted just at the edge of my vision. I felt a constant crushing weight on my chest, the psychic residue of the hundreds of souls from the barrow, all screaming the same warning. The curse fed on disbelief. The more the world ridiculed my work, the stronger it grew, the louder the whispers became. It wanted me to break. It wanted me to dismiss it, to call myself insane, because my doubt would be its final victory. But the sting of betrayal was stronger than my fear. Croft's face etched in my mind was a constant reminder. So I pushed on. I didn't fight the madness. I learned its language. I started to understand the rules. Corpse mark cryptography wasn't just about reading the warnings, it was about learning the grammar of damnation itself. I discovered the counter sigils, the symbols of warding and severing. I tattooed the first one onto my own forearm with a sterilized needle and India ink, a complex knot of lines that brought a sudden, shocking silence to my apartment. The whispers stopped. I had done it. I had cracked the code. I began publishing my findings on obscure forums. A ghost in the machine. My bone collector's code became an urban legend, then a whispered truth among a select few, occultists, deliverance ministers, and desperate people who had seen things they couldn't explain. I was no longer a disgraced scientist. I was a cartographer of curses, the world's foremost and only expert in a field no one had wanted to exist. The call came 5 years after the intervention. It was my mother, her voice a shredded ruin of panic. "It's your father," she sobbed. He's not himself, Eris. He's scratching things, into the walls, into his own skin." I didn't need to ask what he was scratching. I packed a small leather case with my charts, my inks, and my tools. I was no longer the son they had disowned. I was the specialist they had no choice but to call. When I walked back into that house, the silence was different. It wasn't the quiet of affluent suburbia. It was the dead, heavy silence of a place that is being listened to. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror that finally understood. My father was in the living room, sitting unnaturally still. The air around him was cold, and on his arms, fresh and red, were the marks. The 3-pronged fork, the broken circle. "You came," he said, but the voice wasn't his. It was a dry, rasping echo, ancient and filled with contempt. The little scholar, the broken toy. My mother flinched, but I just set my case down on the polished coffee table. I didn't look at the thing wearing my father's face. I looked at my mother. "He told you I was a disgrace," I said, my voice quiet, steady. "He said I was chasing ghosts. He was wrong. I wasn't chasing them. I was learning how to chain them." I unrolled my charts. The osteoglyphs covered the table, a lexicon of dread. The thing in my father laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Your symbols have no power here, boy. This vessel invited me." His doubt was a feast. I picked up a vial of ink and a sharpened stylus. "You're right," I said, finally meeting his gaze. "He did invite you, but he didn't know your name. I do." I spoke a word, a guttural syllable from a language that had never known a living tongue. The entity in my father recoiled, a flicker of shock in his eyes. I moved toward him, and my mother cried out, "Eris, don't!" But I wasn't the son she remembered. I was the man who had walked through hell with a notebook. I placed my hand on my father's forehead, and he thrashed, but he was held fast. I began to draw the counter sigil. The thing inside him screamed, not with rage, but with a sound I knew intimately, the shriek of recognition, the terror of a predator that has just met its master. You wear the code," it hissed through my father's teeth. Its gaze. "I am the archive," I corrected it, finishing the last stroke. A wave of absolute cold erupted from my father, and the windows rattled in their frames. He collapsed, shuddering, a faint black smoke pouring from his mouth before dissipating into nothing. He was just my father again, pale and gasping, the red scratches on his arms already starting to fade. I stood up, turning to face my mother. The shame and terror in her eyes was my victory. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was the chilling, profound vindication of a survivor. They hadn't believed in the darkness.